Thanks, everyone. Well, it's been a really interesting, exciting day so far, and I'll just ask you to take your seats for the final discussion panel of the day. So the way we communicate with each other has changed dramatically over the past generation, and if you need any evidence of it, just look at the big screen behind me. By the way, I've been really loving the tweets, so do keep them going. As a multitude of new information channels have become available, ordinary citizens have become empowered to publicly share their thoughts, their feelings, their pictures, and their videos online in ways they never could before. As a result, social media is shaping events from around the world to here at home, from the Arab Spring to WikiLeaks. It's also shaping the content we use in our day-to-day lives, and it's drastically reshaping the business models of the organizations we have traditionally come to rely on for news and information. To talk to us a bit more about what this all means, we have a great panel of 3 experts from the communications and media worlds, and one in particular who's strolling both of these worlds right now. So without further ado, let me please introduce Scott Hannant, who is the former CTV News Director. Scott is here immediately to my right. His career has taken him from teaching English in revolutionary Iran to running CTV News in Ottawa. Last year, he retired from the rigors of managing one of Canada's most successful newsrooms to set up Hannant Media Solutions, and is now doing what he loves, which is telling stories on video. Scott continues to be a media and communications consultant and teaches at the Carleton University School of Journalism and Communications. On the far side, let me go to Joseph Thornley, the founder of Thornley Communications, who really needs no introduction in PR circles. As a matter of fact, he explicitly asked me not to introduce him, other to say that he has been blogging for the past 5 years. Thank you, Joe. And Melanie Coulson from the Ottawa Citizen. She's been working in online news for more than 12 years now. She was the very first person hired at globeandmail.com and part of a massive media shift from print to digital, and watched as the online audience grew. In 2006, she came to Ottawa to work for the Ottawa Citizen, but after a brief stint working with the print product, she returned to her very first love, which is online news. Melanie is also a teacher at Carleton University's School of Journalism, which is also her alma mater, and she's a founding member of the Ottawa chapter of the Technology Journalist Partnership, Hacks/Hackers. So I'd like to start by throwing a question at this panel. Also, we want to keep this panel really interactive and very spontaneous and lively. So maybe to break with the regular format, I will throw the first question at the panel, but if you have any questions you would like to ask, I'll also monitor the tweet board, or you can come up to the mic. Please do. We want to keep the discussion going, and we really want you to be a part of the conversation. So first, for our panelists, a very broad question. So how has social media changed the way we consume news and information as Canadians? Joe, maybe we can start with you.
Okay, well, we'll start with me, and I may be atypical, but you'll judge. I cannot remember the last time, whoops, there you are. I cannot remember the last time that I actually watched the television news, either at 6 p.m. or at 10 or 11. To me, the big victim, the big casualty of choice has been appointment news. I still consume a huge amount of news that is generated by TV, but I consume it via Google Reader, which is the first thing I open at the beginning of every day. And I get the Globe, I get CTV, I get the CBC news feeds. I don't get the Citizen, and let's talk about paywalls, because that's part of the future. But I do have the Citizen app on my tablet, but to me the news is something to be dipped into as an ever-present stream just like Twitter. I use Twitter, but I say this to everybody in this room. I'm also quite mindful that all the rhetoric about how Twitter replaces RSS feeds and Twitter replaces the need for disciplined news coverage shouldn't apply to us. Because if all that I do is look at the things that I see in my Twitter feed, I become captive to somebody else's thinking. And I don't want to be captive to somebody else's thinking. I want to do my own thinking, which means I need to go to the primary news feeds. The other thing that I use is Google News, because I can go to Google News and I can find the stuff that others have considered important or popular, even though I may not pay attention, and I find that I'm probably a decade older now than I was an hour ago because Davy Jones of the Monkees died, and Google News told me that.
I could have told you that when I walked in the building. However, I don't even remember Davy Jones, so that's before me. I'm going to jump in. I think the way social media is changing the way we consume news. I teach a class. I want to just be clear. Only so many hours of the day. I teach a class at Carleton, and I ask them how they get their news, and they're always very nervous to tell me, because the first thing they don't want to tell me is they don't read the Ottawa Citizen newspaper. So I usually start that class asking them how they consume news, and they all kind of look at their feet, and I say, you know what, it's okay, I don't read the Ottawa Citizen newspaper either. I work at ottawacitizen.com. I get all my news at ottawacitizen.com. Now, I say this at the risk of getting fired. I do read the newspaper in the morning to make sure we've got everything that's in it, see the treatment, make sure we've got keys to the web. But when I ask these students how they get their news, most of them are getting it on their phone. They're not getting it through TV. I would say less than a third of my classes own TVs, so they're now watching news in fragments, in online news on CNN.com, on ottawacitizen.com, on wherever you have it. They're not watching the traditional appointment news, as Joe mentioned, the old newscast. They're not watching that until they get to Scott's class. So a lot of them get it through sharing, which is a little bit concerning for us in the traditional media, and I think we've decided we're going to call ourselves traditional media news organizations, because typically you would just put out a product and people would read you. Now we need to put out a product and make sure people are paying attention and want to share us with their friends. So we can get into that also, but I just before I came here, I looked at our stats on referrals to the ottawacitizen.com stories. So we have a great proportion of our story referrals still come from the main site, as you might expect. Google News and Google Search attribute send 19% of our traffic is from Google News and Google Search, which is a high number. The next number is Facebook. 5% of traffic to our website is through Facebook, and that's something we can't ignore. So, and then Twitter is 4.3%. We have a very engaged Twitter audience. They love when we put out stories and tell them news, send them links. Not so much if we become too conversational on Twitter. They're not too keen on, retweeting other followers, etc. They look to us just for breaking bulletins.
I think social media is, and all of its, the end of traditional media, or the beginning of the end of traditional media was the multi-channel universe. And to me, social media is just another whole bunch of channels, except that they're not one-to-one. They're many to many, and there's an opportunity to take part and be part of all of that. But I think that and I'm not reminiscing and about the good old days, because I'm now a content producer as well. My company produces and tells stories on video. One of the things I'd like to do at Carleton is get them to change the name of my course to television journalism into video journalism, because I believe that storytelling, the production of video doesn't really have to be on television. It can be on social media, and some of the stories are better suited to social media. There was a C.C. Chapman who wrote Content Rules and does social media for Coca-Cola, said that the smart PR people and the smart communications people will hire journalists because that's what they're trained to do, is tell stories. it used to be that students would come into a class and classes that I'd been to before I started teaching, and they'd say, oh, you know, what discipline are you interested in? And some would say TV, and some would say radio, and then the print people would always, you know, look down their noses and say, well, I'm not interested in either of those. I'm, you know, print. And now I tell them that is no longer a choice. They better know radio. They better know television. They better be able to blog. They better know print. They need to know all of these things because the world is multidisciplinary now, and they'll get left behind if they don't know how to do all of this. And I think PR and communications people are going to have to learn those arts and skills as well.
Maybe I can just ask, with all of this free information available and the arrival of an army of citizen journalists, can the traditional media model survive? Is the business model broken? Maybe Melanie, I can throw that to you.
I don't think I'm the first to say that the business model is in fact broken. I mean, we're looking at a business model that's based on the Gutenberg press, and we're dealing with the internet. Mm-hmm. But I'm not. A lot of people. There's a great Twitter guy that I follow. His name is The Media is Dying, and he's very negative about where the media is going. And I guess call me Pollyanna if you wish. I think this is we're in the middle of a great change. There's a lot of upheaval, yes, but I think there's a lot of really fantastic things that are going on there. We're reporting things, and by we, I don't just mean traditional media. Social media gives a voice to everyone. So it gives a chance to tell stories in places that we can't go. So I don't know that we're dying. I think we're evolving, and you know, let's hope it'll be like the very hungry caterpillar that at the end turns into the beautiful butterfly. Sorry, small children reference. But I do think that we have to figure out what's going on and figure out how to transform ourselves. The one thing about everyone having a voice, and this is something I'm very cognizant of, is that just because everyone is able to tweet and able to blog, I think the more voices out there and the more noise out there, the more reliance folks will have on traditional media. So I'd like to believe that our function is very much that of the traditional A1 editor from 1950s, who would sit down at the end of the day and say, these are the stories the readers need to read on the front page of their paper. So I like to think that our job as a traditional media is one with integrity and trust, and that we will say, okay, well, of all the Lady Gaga out there, this is what you need to know.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that point because I think Mel's absolutely right. And we in this room should know that today the name of the game is curation. In an environment of unlimited content, finding the stuff that actually matters or is credible or is trustworthy is what really counts. And to me, as I look at Canadian newspapers, Canadian media compared to US media, I was fascinated by how quickly US news organizations went into the tank, while at the same time we had organizations like CBC, the Globe, Post Media that were actively innovating and trying things and not going into the tank, because it seemed to me there is a recognition that the one thing that news organizations do have that you can't take away from them is they have smart people who know how to sift through all of the stuff and curate and find the stuff that should actually count. As a consumer of news, I don't necessarily have the time to do that on new topics that I'm discovering. I'd just like quickly, before giving Scott a chance on this point, to go back to the question of the business model. I think it's really important for us when we look at, as people, many of whom are younger than me, if not all of you, it's important for us to have a sense of history, and too often we don't. I'm a child of the one and only generation that has a fat middle because I spent all my time on a couch watching television. But that generation, that's gone, that's over, that won't exist again. But you talk to a boomer like me and they think, well, that's the way it always was. Anybody who was schooled in journalism would no doubt be familiar with the era of the penny newspaper, the era when a city like Chicago or New York would have dozens, if not hundreds, of newspapers. The era in which the press came along and allowed newspapers to go from being 5 or 6 cents a copy down to 1 cent a copy, and in which you could support all of those distinctive newspapers because they were so cheap and they needed a much smaller audience. It's only our generation that assumes that the era that was populated by people who could get one of 13 channels licensed to them from the CRTC, or in the case of the CBC, have a commitment to have broadcast transmitters, very expensive things, across the entire country, that we think that media has to be mass and expensive. It doesn't. And I think that media organizations are populated by smart business people as well as journalists. It means that there's a different model, but it doesn't have to be the mass model, and that would be the mistake if everybody tries to make a mass business model work in an era of niche.
Yeah, perhaps I can ask Scott, what are some of the things that CTV News had to do to adapt to this new environment? You know, Joe was saying that we're not watching television news the way we used to.
Well, for those of you who watched Dimitri's presentation earlier, we still are watching television, and we still are reading newspapers. But boy, if we think that that's going to be the same in 2 or 3 years, we've got another thing coming. Sometimes I think that it's like you're on top of the carriage with the horses in front of you and watching these cars and sort of saying, well, you know, that's just a trend, and that's just, you know, so we'll just, you know, make more comfortable seats for our carriages, and we'll just, you know, have gas lights, and we'll just, no, you know, I think that there are those who would argue that the whole model has to be not fixed, but changed completely. There needs to be a new model. I've been reading a lot and listening to a lot of John Payton's stuff, who started as a I think with the Sun, and now claims to have a 57 million subscribers a month, and is earning billions of dollars in revenues. And he talks about digital dimes and print dollars. And so I think while on the news side, you know, we're changing and we're innovating and we're aware of what's going on, and we're trying to move towards a direction that's sort of social media and print and all, and a kind of combination and a hybrid, that may not be the way to go. That we just may need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What Payton's doing is he's taking the revenue that he's making from his traditional media, and he's using it to finance his digital media, to build a digital empire in a new way, with a new model. And I that's what I understand. And I think that you need to be able to concentrate on the journalism, the information gathering, the information dissemination and distribution, but somebody also needs to train the sales force to sell those digital dimes, because those digital dimes are what finances the change and finances the newsrooms. And having worked as a news executive, you know, every time we lost a ratings point, which luckily we didn't do too often, I was worried that I'd have to lay off people, and that would diminish my news gathering capacity, and I would have less to report, and the quality would go down because we would be more thinly spread. So in terms of what has social media done, what is the same as those channels, it has more thinly spread the advertising dollar, and the dollar that finances all of the information gathering and the news gathering.
Maybe I'll just throw a question at Joe here as a longtime communications consultant. So one of the other things we heard from Dimitri is that you need to have a digital strategy, but it shouldn't be the strategy. I'm wondering, how big of a role does social media play versus traditional media in the campaigns or the approaches that you suggest for your clients now? And what kind of a role does it
I
play?
can't answer that because everybody who actually works with me and really does the work would probably shoot me. But for myself, it's digital first, and it's just a question of people catching up. And let me explain. Again, I really do think, as I look at the media trying to catch up to the current trends, the world has changed as profoundly as the world changed when television showed us pictures for anybody who was in radio. And radio had to figure out another way to exist, and it did quite successfully. I think that for traditional media, which is based upon mass, which is based upon one newspaper per city with a mass audience, which is based upon limited spectrum, that's over. That's done with. I look at technology. I used to have a subscription to PC Mag. I don't think they even print anymore. But right here on this is the future, and this allows me to watch video on the mini version of that. My alarm goes off at 6 in the morning, and I click on the CBC app instead of turning on my radio, and I listen to CBC at 6 a.m. on the CBC app via Wi-Fi. On this thing, we have Leo Laporte, who used to be on Tech TV, which had the huge expense of a broadcast television station. Now he's sitting out there with Twit TV, and on my iPad, because I care about technology, I've got iPad Today, The Social Hour, Tech News Today, This Week in Technology, This Week in Google. All 5 of them produced by Leo Laporte from his very small made studio, but a giant in tech journalism on a North American scale with no broadcast. So I think that the world is quite different, and just as the person who used to have the corner drugstore that doesn't exist anymore, the corner hardware store that doesn't exist anymore because scale changed everything on them, and now it's Home Depot and Shoppers Drug Mart, that for mainstream media, the way to cope is to go the other direction. I'm not saying hyper-local, although I do read The Citizen because it gives me news about my community and news I can trust. But scale is everything, and trying to restore yesterday's business model will mark those that actually don't make it through the transition.
I think that what has to happen is that CBC, CTV, Global need to leverage their brand right now, and they need to do what The Citizen is doing, CTV to a lesser extent, CBC is doing some very interesting stuff, but they need to take that brand that they've built in traditional media that's still valuable. 80% still think that television is the most important medium, and they have to realize that it won't be very quickly, and they need to take that brand, leverage it into all of their online activities and properties, and go from there, because I can't see the print and the cost of fuel and all of that. It's got to disappear. It just has to.
I think we're talking about social media today, and I think I'm going to try to speak to the communications experts in the room, but I think in terms of building a brand, the platforms that are out there are what help you do it. And it's very easy to build your brand or crush your brand, as the case may be. Today, Facebook announced it's having business pages in a timeline format, which, if you're familiar with Facebook timeline, some people have been forced into it. It goes right back to the day you were born, and you're able to upload major events in your life. So this happened this morning. We were like, this is awesome for The Citizen. Because if you think about The Citizen as the brand, we were here pretty early, right? So if we put every newspaper for every major event in the city on Facebook's timeline, on our timeline Facebook page, and Mark, no, we haven't done it yet, so please don't go looking for it. You could see our involvement in the community, and that this is the front page story on the day. We have some great archival shots of the very first story. I'm thinking about New York Times, and it did its very first page. It put up pages on the day JFK was shot, major events in municipal affairs or in national affairs. And so that's a way for us to use this platform to reach people and to build our relationship with people. I find it really interesting that the Facebook stat is 5%, to be honest, to our site. We have 1,600 likes, which is pretty pathetic. If you go to New York Times Facebook page, they have 2 million. 2 million people like New York Times, which means in their news feed, New York Times will show up. So, of course, we're very envious of this. So the fact that we get 5% of our web traffic from 1,600 people, that's incredible to me. Conversely, on Twitter, we have 16, and I know Mark's sitting there checking my metrics, 16,000 followers on Twitter and 4.3% of referrals from Twitter. So that's another way to build your brand. One way we did our live reporting during the big earthquake, I think it was 2010, June 2010. We just started, as soon as we were allowed back in our building, and even actually from the street on our phones, anything we learned, we just started throwing it out there. We didn't have a web story, we didn't have a news story, we just, looks like the epicenter may be here. Now we're hearing it's in Quebec, it's in Buckingham. Magnitude 5.5. No, that's been upgraded. No, that's back down to 5.5. But we became the source for people on Twitter of what the heck's going on. And every now and then we'll still get a tweet saying, office workers are outside of Tony's pasture, what's going on? So we make a few calls. Looks like it's a false alarm, smoke detector, you should be back in an hour. And I think that's the sense of social media, is that we have to remember it's social, right? And it's not just putting out a paper at the end of, the next day when I did my print stint, I was the night editor, so it was midnight. It's not just putting out a paper in the morning telling people what's going on, it's constant. And it's also listening. So I think for people building their company's brands, things like Facebook timeline are something to be embraced, because that's a way for people to learn all about you and the history of your company and what you've done for them to build a relationship.
Can I ask a question of Mel? And don't answer it, but if you feel uncomfortable, because I don't mean to put you on the spot. But Post Media is innovating. We read about how Post Media is talking about a digital-first strategy. Those of us that were Third Tuesday back in November saw Jeff Jarvis. You were there. He advises Post Media. You're the online editor at The Citizen. Yeah. You have people who have developed apps. You're very aware, and you talk about social media in this way. So you're at the epicenter of it. Can you give us a sense of how things have changed in the last 5 years during the era of social, as someone who was there doing digital before social and now? What are the things that you're looking at today that you didn't look at, and where do you see things going in the next 12 months?
I think the first thing that my role has changed is that we had very separate silos in newsroom and advertising and marketing. They were very separate, distinct silos. Now we meet and we talk about how, because our Facebook page is not just our newsroom page, it's also our marketing page. We haven't gone into Facebook ads yet, but who knows, if that's a source of revenue, that would be great. But the silos have broken down. I think the way we look at social media is a way of distribution of our news, a way of getting the word out there of what we're doing. So unfortunately, in the 5-6 years I've been at The Citizen, I've also seen 2 rounds of buyouts, which is another reality of the media. So our newsroom is shrinking. So you have this online team, which has not grown, and yet the online editor who used to come in 5 years ago, post stories onto our website, make sure the photos were up there. I think 5 years ago was pretty rough. Now posting video. They now have to make sure they've got video, photos, that they're posting stories to Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and now Pinterest, and whatever else is coming around the street in the next week or 2. So you've got the same amount of people, but you're asking them to do more. So you have to really decide what it is that you're going to do and what you're going to do well, and what that perhaps you don't do as often or you don't put your focus on. We've seen, we all know that most of the news you get, you got the death of the Monkees lead singer whose name just popped out.
Davy Jones.
Davy Jones. Davy Jones's death from your Google reader. I saw it first on Facebook. So it's interesting that you can, to me, that I didn't see it at NewYorkTimes.com, and I know I'm picking on them, but or referring to them a lot. But I didn't see it on a traditional media webpage. I saw it on Facebook.
I think the days are gone far gone when all of this was just something that newspaper editors and news directors considered to be a necessary evil. I still think that you know, the C.C. Chapman book is called Content Rules, and I would say content is king. I think that the biggest threat to any news organization, online, offline, television, radio, whatever, is mediocrity. Is bad reporting, irrelevant information. I asked my class on Monday, I wanted to talk to them a little bit about news sources and all of that, and again, I'm their TV prof, and so they want to convince me that they're watching TV all the time. At the end of the day, on Saturday I was at a dinner party with a bunch of people who were over 40. None of them were following tweets, and none of them tweeted. Monday morning in my journalism class, everybody in the class, most of them tweeted, all of them were following at least 3 or 4 people. What interested me about the line of questioning was I asked them the difference between news and information. These are journalism students, and it was vague. It was vague. What is the difference? And I finally talked about immediacy, but it was interesting to me that was not something that they really could distinguish that easily. As I say, I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of bits of information that go out on social media, but there still needs to be the storytelling. There still needs to be the substance. And the thing that concerns me with all of this is that, again, I keep going back to the sales and the digital dimes. Something has to finance good journalism. Something has to pay for someone to get on a plane with a news crew and go and gather that information and get it onto social media, onto television, onto radio. CTV just cut in the Ottawa newsroom 19 full-time, 15 part-time jobs. The week before that, they cut, I think, 6 people within the CTV management structure of the newsroom. A lot of that has to do with automation. Some of it has to do with cutting editors to bring cameramen back into the newsroom earlier to edit information. What this means is that less people are on the street, less people are gathering information. And so while there is great citizen journalism and there is informed commentary and there are fascinating blogs, at the core of all of this there needs to be a platform, a root of good journalism that requires money, that requires dedication, and requires amongst people who are reaping the profits a sense of responsibility. And it's that sense of responsibility that used to be before I was even born, that newsrooms were not profit centers. Newsrooms were what the CRTC made you have in order to make money from all of the talk shows and game shows and all of the other things. And so my worry in all of this is I think it's so exciting. I'm a content producer now, and it's so exciting that to be able to do that. What concerns me is the responsibility that needs to be taken that CBC, CTV, and these companies are still taking to fund good journalism, to make sure that it continues to happen, to make sure that the Arab Spring is relevant, not just among Twitter followers in that area, but throughout the whole world.
Can I hop in there? Because, something that I found really interesting that you just said was laying off editors to bring back camera people. And it strikes me that's just the opposite of what I would have expected. And it strikes me that today there's an unlimited number of witnesses. They may not produce Mike Edgell style video, as he's always telling me my Sony Handycam video sucks, but I can get the shot because I'm sitting right there. And it struck me that Arab Spring, I have no idea who the Western reporters were that were on the street, but I do have a sense of who it was that was curating the tweets, figuring out the sources, bringing me the storyline, and those people were back in the newsrooms. They weren't on the street. So I just wonder for both Scott, both you and Mel, whether one of the reactions to social media may well be that news organizations will realize that their principal value is with the curator, the trained editor, and that we will have super newsrooms in a few places across the country that are pulling in information from stringers via Skype, via social media, via whatever across the country. Or am I dreaming that that's a viable future?
And also, I guess another question is that people have with fear of social media is, are we dumbing down news if all we're doing is aggregating from different sources And, I mean, can we have a meaningful conversation in 140 characters or less?
I think
We're going to have opposing views on this, I think.
you know what's interesting to me is that when I was a news director, I was working ridiculous hours, and social media and the communications end of this meant that I could, that people could reach me at any time, and they were, can I do this? Should I do that? And so. So it was constant. The flow of information was constant. The management of the newsroom was constant. I didn't have an assistant news director, and so it was always. And one of the things that I've been able to do since I left an active career in active journalism is think, which has been a real luxury, because I'm not sure that I had time to think before, and my children and my grandchildren are developing, or hopefully grandchildren someday, are developing the ability to multitask in the same way that I'm sitting there and watching Mark listen, do all of this. I'm not sure that I'm capable of doing that. And so one of the things that's been wonderful for me is the ability to think, the ability to get that kind of Jeffrey Simpson kind of thought process that goes into writing one column a day, calling people, giving it some thought. And so the same kind of incredibly exciting tweeting that went on around the earthquake and live and all of that, I hope that there is a balance where people are actually allowed to think, to gather news, to analyze it, and to make sense of it all.
I think that you make a good point, and I'm recalling the Gordon Lightfoot is dead thing on Twitter. I don't know if you recall this. Gordon Lightfoot was declared dead. Everyone was RIPing Gordon Lightfoot on Twitter, I think, for about an hour or two. Suddenly, Gordon Lightfoot phoned up a Toronto radio station and said, "I'm alive, going to the dentist." So I think the basic tenements of journalism are still there. We still need to verify, fact check, do everything we did. Just because we can get the word out faster doesn't mean that it can't be, it still has to be accurate, is what I'm saying. On the other hand, I think that with social media, you have an excellent opportunity to crowdsource. So something like robocalls, which, I'm so disappointed no one asked Dimitri Soudis about. But anyway, with something like robocalls, we have a story that broke and then went viral. And it went viral via Twitter, Facebook, etc. And suddenly you start getting reports of, hey, that happened in my riding. Hey, that happened to me in my riding. And I think the reason that story has gone to, okay, now we're at more than plus 40 ridings that have received, people have said they have received, is because of the social media aspect, the fact that it's spread like wildfire. Would the same have happened? Let's pretend we're in a world where it would be a horrible dystopic vision to not have social media, in my view, but only newspapers. And someone didn't pick up the Ottawa Citizen or Post Media paper and see Glenn McGregor's exclusive on the automated calls. How would they realize that, oh, actually, I'm sitting here in North Bay and I got that call too? So I think that's the power of social media, is its reach, and as a crowdsourcing tool. Does journalism disappear? No, not absolutely not. But I think journalism is enhanced. I think your ability to do investigation is enhanced. You can't let the immediacy of it make you forget that you still have an obligation to be accurate with your stories.
Due diligence.
Yeah, it's still there. But I think also, I have to be honest that Arab Spring, if I had seen it on the TV news, I probably would have thought, okay, it's another uprising in the Middle East. Andy Carvin at NPR retweeted so many details about the Arab Spring, and he verified so much of that all through Twitter that I was captivated by Andy Carvin's tweets. And he did I was at a Hacks Hackers Boston thing, and he had more than 200,000 tweets. People had tweeted him or he'd retweeted, all on the Arab Spring in a time span of 4 or 5 months. And it was incredible that he had that much reach to that many people in such a short time. And I think that's indicative of where social media is taking us.
I want to pick up on the idea that Christina threw out there about the dumbing down of news. I look at it more as it's demonstrating the emperor of objectivity has no clothes. And again, I think with a sense of history, objectivity as the holy grail of journalism is again a modern invention. Going back to the Globe and the Mail and Tory versus Grit newspapers, they made no pretense that they were objective. I think, and I've been biting my tongue, but I'm going to say it. So I'm one of those dinosaurs of the Chrétien-Trudeau era. I sat there being an insider, shaking my fist at and I'll pick on him because he's a first-rate journalist and he's the only one who's still in the news chair anymore, but Peter Mansbridge. And I think then it was Keith Bogue and some other people. And I knew what was on the screen was wrong. And I watched as Peter Mansbridge and the CBC people denied the fact that he had a cottage on the same lake with some of the Paul Martin people, that had any impact on his objectivity, that relationships didn't count. I went to the cocktail parties in Ottawa where I met journalists, they met me, and we related as real people. And then I watched the news and I watched our National Press Gallery suggest that they were objective and only they were objective, and that was quality. BS. Transparency is what social media has given us. Transparency is where we can all call out people, and there's nothing wrong with having relationships. But that's, I think, the big difference. It's not dumbing down the news, it's giving us so many more touch points to gauge reality and to see where reality is. Last thing, and then I'll shut up. You know, I look at the current press gallery and I look at the current government, and I'm firmly embedded in social media and I believe in social media. I look at the Prime Minister's command and control approach to media. The only place that works is with the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Look at the Twitter sphere, look at the blogs. It doesn't. Everybody knows what's going on, but it's the gallery that falls prey to that because the gallery needs to have access. Social media people don't need to have access that way. So I don't think it's dumbing down. I think it's democratizing in a very smart way, but we still need the editors who are trained to cut through the kind of stuff, to look at what I just said and say, is that guy full of BS? Does that guy know what he's talking about? And to take the discussion forward once I've actually testified as I have.
So maybe to pick up on that point, Joe, what would you say is the most powerful tool of political or social influence in Canada today? We heard from Scott that people of an older generation are still not using the new technologies. We've heard from people who worked on the election campaigns that they still rely very heavily on traditional media. So which is the more powerful tool, and where will we be 5 years from now?
Good question. I don't know which is the more powerful tool. I just did a post while I was sitting at home that started out to be one post and turned into another post about how I've got 4 social networks that I spend time with, and each one does something different. And of course, Twitter is the news feed. Google is where I go for smart people talking in depth. Facebook, all my friends are there, but nothing substantive happens there. And then LinkedIn is the users network. Use me, give me a job, that kind of thing. But I'm on all 4, and they're all different depending on what you want to do. But I think in terms of large numbers of people coming together, the very fact that as Mel just said, those stats, there are a 10th the number of people on Twitter as there are on Facebook, and yet the Twitter is driving, within 5.05% as much traffic to the Citizen, suggests to me that that's the really powerful one when people are talking about substantive stuff.
Maybe I can ask a question to Mel. Since you're still in the information business, you still do journalism on a day-to-day basis. So how much do you rely on social media? How does it shape your day-to-day content in your work as a journalist?
I and all the folks on our online team, we have 2 monitors on our desk, and one is always on Hootsuite or TweetDeck, and we're watching what's out there. We're also watching what's on Facebook. I think Joe's hit on something that I still think, even though there's more people on Facebook, It's people connecting on a personal level. I'm not sure they're there for news from us. We've noticed if we post warm, fuzzy stories like a video of Moxie, the puck retrieving dog, on Facebook, people love that kind of story. If we post on Twitter, public service cuts won't be as bad as you said. That gets retweeted like crazy. So it's a different audience for each platform. We also notice on Google Plus, which is still a smaller following, a lot of I tend to call it the more cerebral news, like city hall policies, government news, gets a lot more comments, a lot more sharing than if we were to post Moxie, the puck retrieving dog, on Google Plus. I'm not sure there would be a lot of uptake. That's not what it's there for. You have to. I also think you have to recognize the demographics. Google Plus is 80% men. Pinterest, which we've just jumped into, is 80% women. So we put a lot of our lifestyle stuff on Pinterest. A lot of our we put Ottawa news on there too, but we make sure that all of our food stuff, because it's such a visual medium, food, our homes, travel, all the juicy sink your teeth into weekend section stuff goes on Pinterest. So we can attract that audience too. So you have to also remember who your audience is on each platform. It's a lot to think about, and we have to be very careful how we do it. We have reporters. Every reporter has a Twitter account too, so that can be kind of daunting. And we've talked about whether we need an official social media policy like the government has handed down. And so far we've noticed it's just a gentle tap on the shoulder to someone to say, hey, you've gone too far, if they have gone too far, is probably all they need to be reminded that they're not being perhaps as professional as we'd like. We had a horrible case of the shooting at the tanning salon in Ottawa South, and our police reporter found out pretty early from one of the police officers on the scene. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. She found out pretty early at the scene from the police officer that these were known to police, probably organized crime guy, or the victim. One of the victims was an organized crime. So she sent what she thought was a DM, or not a DM, a BlackBerry message to her editor, saying, 2 Vics, both bad guys. Unfortunately, 2 victims dead, both bad guys. Unfortunately, it went out on our Twitter stream. So we were instantly attacked and I had, unfortunately, created a live blog to follow our Twitter stream. And so it went out on our site, and people were instantly, what are you saying? They deserve to be killed, even if they are, have a criminal record, blah, blah. And you have to remember that even if this fellow, and it turned out he was connected to organized crime in Montreal, he still has a wife and kids and that kind of thing. And we had to manage. So we jumped on our sword. And I was tweeting, and I said, look, apologies, that was uncalled for. And a lot of people said, thank you for that, for recognizing you went too far. And there's a lot of discussion that goes on in a newsroom which really doesn't need to go out into the public. Comments like that, right? So we need to remind our reporters that even though they can access the public that way and broadcast directly without an editor, they need to use some professional smarts as well.
But you've talked about how it's influenced the output. I guess what I wanted to know is how does it influence the input?
Oh, okay. So we get a lot of criticisms on Twitter, which is great. It's a great way to instantly give us feedback. So we will say, great, sorry you feel that way. Here's a person to get in touch with, or do you mind DMing us so we can get in touch with you? One message I love is during the H1N1 clinics that the city had. Someone tweeted us and said, hey, Ottawa citizen, you know what, I've been standing in line for 2 hours. I would love it if you drop off some papers. We were there within an hour handing out papers. See, that's a great way to jump on a message. And from that day, I think they ran for a week or two. Every day we were just dropping off papers, and Ottawa Public Health loved that. But it's just one person who just voiced that idea, and we didn't think of that idea. It was marvelous. You're a captive audience. And while you're there, check us out on ottawacitizen.com. But good for them for tweeting us, and I think even better for our reader sales and service for acting on it as quickly as they did. And so I guess you were asking about what changed is the fact that someone from the newsroom, yours truly, contacted the reader sales and service department and said, whereas normally, traditionally, we would never talk, right? These are the guys that deal with your subscriptions. We don't need to talk to them. Instead, we're like, hey, can we drop off how many thousands of extra papers we have in the morning? Can we go dump them at one of these clinics?
Is there any other examples maybe that you would like to share? Scott, I think you had a point you wanted to make.
I think one of the, there's all this one-to-one and many-to-one and one-to-many and many-to-many and all of this. if you can start a dialogue amongst the people who are following you, that's great. The shortcoming that large media organizations have is that to actually try to answer, I used to be a point of pride with me when I started as a news executive that people wrote in, I would personally answer them. I would telephone them, especially if it was a complaint that I thought was legitimate. I would get back to them. But when you suddenly have hundreds of emails, you're trying to you can sort of compartmentalize them and try to answer in that way, but there's no way that you can get back to all of those people and answer them. And so I think if you can start a conversation amongst those people talking about what you've done, that's a great objective. But to actually be able to once in a while deliver the papers, that's great too. But it's tough because you said at one stage you were glad that they wrote and said that you were glad that they were glad that you had recognized. I think that they're actually glad that you listened to them, that you took some action. And occasionally we would say, we've had a lot of response to this story. You've told us.
Right.
You've said to us, and we are responding. That's very powerful, and that builds brand loyalty. I think to a tremendous amount of brand loyalty.
I think, Melanie, also you spoke about some of the potential pitfalls in using social media, and this applies to us as communicators as much as it does to journalists. But would you say that the rules of engagement are different for a journalist or an organization, if you're a PR professional and you're representing your organization, than they would be for regular citizens? And what are some of those potential pitfalls? And I'm throwing it to that question to anybody on the panel.
I'll jump in. We actually, I teach a second-year reporting class at Carleton. It's basic how to conduct an interview, how to source, that kind of thing. It's very, very basic. And we have a discussion about your presence online and how you are regarded. And I think that, yes, we are held to a different standard because we are connected. Even as I sit here today, and I confess that I don't read the paper as some do in our newsroom, that's out there, right? And my company now knows this, and I'm representing the citizen when I say this. When I tweet, if I was to tweet something political, I think it doesn't just stay with me, it stays with the whole organization. And it's not just me, the individual, speaking. It's the same as putting a political sign on my lawn. It's a public display of a partisanship. And it can be, towards a political party or even a bill that's in the House. I mean, I think you have to be very careful that way, which way you're going to go on tweeting things. And I think that companies can do the same thing, right? There's a corporate message, and I think that journalists are held to a different standard for sure. I mean, the fact that you're shaking your head when Megan Hurley tweeted, "They're bad guys, both dead." If it was just Megan Hurley who happened to live on the street, you'd be like, oh, well, Megan Hurley's a bit of an idiot, but anyway. But because she's a reporter with The Citizen, you hold her to a higher standard than you would if she was just someone who happened upon this and heard from the police officer that they were bad.
The debate amongst news executives in traditional media it wasn't that long ago that news executives in traditional media were debating whether reporters, as part of their the identification on the screen, now it's Twitter. The big debate not that long ago was whether their email addresses should be up there and whether they should be able to, how would a newspaper editor, how would a producer control? And it was all about control. And the control was from a legal perspective, it was from you're sending somebody who's relatively new out. How do you make sure that it's up to the standards? There was all of this debate. That debate is long gone. I mean, you're a reporter for traditional media. You are expected to know what you can and cannot and should not put out there, and what responsibilities you have as an employee, as a reporter to the brand and to the craft.
So this has gone by extremely quickly, and we're almost out of time here. So I just wanted to acknowledge a question I believe we had on the tweet wall behind us, which was, so how do you cut through that sea of information, the sea of noise?
How do we as editors? I don't know who posed the question. That's really kind of cool.
I think it's probably meant from a communicator's perspective.
Okay,
but-
cool. Go, Joe. How do you cut through?
Oh, well, I would think if I was asking the question, it would be because we all generate content. I mean, the thing that we haven't talked a lot about is, I think, Scott, you alluded to it, it is content. Brand journalism, our ability to express things. Before I came here today, I was doing some research about William Mugear, the next speaker at a Third Tuesday. That's not a pitch, but he's got a startup, Equentia Engagio. I did a search for the guy. I went to his own site, and I saw that he had taken mainstream media. He had crafted it all and presented it in a way that it told the Engagio and the Equentia story. There's lots of stuff coming through. We all generate that kind of stuff on websites, blogs, news releases, and with all that kind of stuff, I think the question is intended to the newsroom. How do you actually look at all of that now with a greater flow? It's not just the newswire anymore.
Well, I think the same way that I hope we are seen as a place for integrity and trust, we have trusted in sources that I mean, it's the same, to be honest, it's the same rules we would use from our multitude of sources out there already. Anything that's out there, we know, you know who's got an axe to grind and who you can trust and who has a genuine story tip. How do you cut through it? Or how do we be the voice and maybe host the conversation? I think that's exactly what we try to do, is we try to be the place. So we're the place that you can find the fun video on Moxie, the puck retrieving dog, but you can also find out about robocalls and the latest on Pierre Poutine. Wow, we're not quite as light as I'm making this sound. But you are, and also, to be honest, it is local also. We're the place you can go to for Ottawa news. If you want to know, why are the people in Tony's pasture outside? Okay, ask the Ottawa Citizen, they'll get back to you. They'll tell you, right? So I think that you need to be the place to host the conversation. I saw a great tweet actually from General Electric about their Healthy Imagination campaign. I have to admit I don't know that much about GE's Healthy Imagination, but it was, what makes you feel healthy? And all these people were tweeting, and it was Healthy Imagination was the hashtag, and all these people were just tweeting like sunny days or eating a great breakfast, and what a great way for GE to own that dialogue, right? That's just a conversation, it's a chat. All these people are now thinking GE whenever they, it was pretty smart. As an outside observer, I was like, you guys have figured it out. I think it comes down to, it's social media, it is social, it's a dialogue. Again, I think you asked about 5 years from now, I think Facebook, to be honest, I know Joe's a big Google Plus fan, but I think Facebook is going to end up winning that battle, I'm afraid. I've seen some companies do some amazing things. Porsche's used a lot of its Facebook fans in their integration or creation of product, which is amazing too, to say, this is what we're thinking of putting on the new 911. What do you think of this? And that's pretty amazing. That's pretty empowering. So I think people will jump in and go buy that car maybe when they make it.
So I'd like to thank you for ending that with a bit of a marketing perspective, because it's
no
going to
marketing
be
background whatsoever.
very relevant to everybody in the room. We're pretty much almost out of time here. We have room maybe for one quick question.
Sorry, Scott.
Is there a question from the floor? Thank you.
So given that, you're monitoring all these different sources of information and to get tips and find some new, use this great. You're a PR person, you're you're following a journalist and tweeting to them as they're talking about something. What method is now more relevant or succeeding the journalist much better than the other?
Good question. I think tweeting the journalist is a brilliant idea. Now you're all going to be flooding our reporters with tweets, but I think that's a great way to get the message across. I think email is very slow. We don't always have time to check email. I'm sure you're the same. We always check our tweets. And a lot of journalists actually have Facebook pages set up as subscription models. That's the way I do too. So if I'm not your friend, you can still see my updates, my public updates. And they've found that a lot of sources will talk to them because they see them as a person, not just the person phoning from on the phone. So I guess if you're looking at what channel to make your pitch, I think a tweet is great. I think email is still good, but to be honest, if they're on Twitter, I would jump in. If they're active on Twitter, that's the way to get them. That's the way to get them quickly.
Any kind of personal, anyone that you know personally that can identify you as a person. So it's not just an anonymous sort of PR. You know, it's somebody who you've met, who you have a personal contact with. That's also going to be more likely to get through more quickly. No, but they always find time to drink.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know what? I just very quickly, you know, my kids are very much grown up now, but I used to go in and say, you know, how can you do your homework when you have when you have those headphones on, and what I think is that all of that, the way the brain works, all of that is evolving to the point where the multitasking, the ability to multitask is evolving. Now it's, you know, how can you do your homework when you have those headphones on and you're on Facebook and you've got, you know, that one on Twitter and you've got, you know, so and they're still managing to graduate from high school and so I think as the workforce, you know, when I look at this and I go, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed with the noise, with the all of that. I think that as the workforce evolves, that it'll just become part of what they do and how they do it, and that will help to change it, as you know, change the world we live in as well. Just we're evolving, and our brains are evolving with the technology.
So
Mine in particular, but many of them.
So I think Mark had a question.
The context of my question
I'm sorry, I think I was cranking my neck to get to the tweet well, but I'm sorry I lost that one. So we've gone a little bit past the time, but it's just more evidence of a fascinating discussion to end what was really an enlightening day. I would like to ask André Chabot, the president of Chabot and the event sponsor, to come to the stage. Thank you very much. And I would also like to present our panelists with a little parting gift. Thank you so much for your time. It was really informative.